Hey, I'm Daniel Katz. We're just gonna take a sec. There's a couple people still, well, there's one person still connecting to audio, so I'll just hold off a sec on that. Let's see. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. I'm hoping we get a couple more here, but if you haven't watched the part 1 and part 2, then they're posted on the Tandon Teaches Aviation website also. So you can go ahead and look back at the part 1, part 2 stuff, where we talked about how to get a pilot's license, what you need in order to get a pilot's license, and then we talked about aerodynamics and maintenance and a couple other fun things. I'll take another second here for people to get connected because it seems like there's a couple more people coming in. Today, what I really wanted to talk about was a VFR or a flight from start to finish. So I'm going to be talking about flight planning and how we go about prepping for a complete flight. And I'll walk you through kind of the steps to how a complete flight happens with a couple of videos, hopefully. So I'll share my screen and we'll get going here. Oh, we got a couple more in the waiting room still. Do you want to let them in?
Got him.
Got him. Okay. Oh, hey, welcome. I know a couple of those names, so welcome. That's great. I'm glad that everybody's here for everybody here is interested in aviation. That'll be great. All right, let me get started here. So hopefully at this point you can see my screen. I'm Daniel Katz. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, excuse me. And I'm also a commercial pilot, airplane, single engine land, and instrument airplane, and a certified flight instructor for airplane, single engine, and instrument airplane. And then I also, years ago, got my ground instructor certificate for instrument and airplane, which basically means that I can teach, I can fly, obviously. That's the first thing. And I can teach students how to fly as well as how to fly in the clouds. And I can teach ground schools and this type of fun stuff. So I've been flying for about 18 years now, actually over 18 years. I got my pilot's license in June of 2002 and my instrument rating in December of 2002. Yes, that's not a typo. I still putting typos in, I want to say 2012 instead of 2002. No, that was 18 years ago. And I got my commercial license. And then obviously, since my vocation is teaching and my avocation is flying, it made sense for me to get my flight instructor certificate. So I went ahead and did that in 2007. And I've been flying and teaching sort of ever since. I don't teach a lot and I don't take on new students, but when friends need flight reviews and things that we do on a regular basis for recurrent training, I'll always take care of that kind of stuff. So today I want to kind of give you an idea of everything that goes into putting an aircraft in the air and safely bringing it back down. And I know it seems like that should be a relatively easy thing. I'm being facetious there, of course. But there's a lot of background and paperwork and how we do things in preparation for literally putting the key in the engine and starting the key in the ignition and starting the engine. So I just want to go over the very basics, and we don't have a ton of time, but I'll go over as much as I can. And I have a couple of videos, and I'll show you some of the flight planning tools that I use on a regular basis. I was telling Deanna and Randy that come Saturday, I actually have a flight that I have to conduct. I'm going 3 legs. I'm going from northern New Jersey, where I keep my airplane, to southern New Jersey to pick up 10 puppies that were rescued out of a kill shelter down in North Carolina. And then I'm going to transport them to Long Island, where they have families lined up for adoption. And then I'm going to transport my family, us, back to our home airport, which is in New Jersey. So I'll kind of do a little flight planning for that. It's a couple days early, but even this far out, I would have started, and I already have started looking at weather and trying to figure things out. So I want to give you an idea of the most important stuff that it takes to get an airplane off the ground, and that is airspeed and money. Once you get enough airspeed going over the wings, the plane will fly, but it really takes money to get the airspeed moving. So it only takes two things to fly, airspeed and money. And my wife bought me that shirt a couple of years ago, and I have to remember not to wear it around other pilots. So uh, we're going to talk about the differences in the rules that we have for flying. And what we basically have, there's two different types of flying, and the certificate that you hold will permit you either visual flight rules or instrument flight rules. Now, instrument flight rules are more restrictive, and what that means is that every IFR pilot is capable of flying VFR, but the opposite is absolutely not true. Visual flight rules are just that. We have to be able to look outside the window. We use the horizon primarily for flying. And so if you don't have the horizon, then you can't fly under visual flight rules. That's basically the fundamental ideas. The reasons for this are pretty easy to understand if you understand the physics of how your inner ear works. And as a pilot, you sort of have to learn tons of things about, yes, airspace and how airplanes operate, but you also have to learn about flight physiology, the way your body is going to work inside the air, as well as weather. So inside your ear are these things called the semicircular canals, and we all learn about that in biology in high school, and we totally forget it, of course. But you've got in order to stay upright with your eyes closed, you use these little semicircular canals, which have fluid in them, and they detect the motion that your body's making, and your body naturally corrects. And you don't even think about this. You learn this as a baby, how to keep your body upright. And so when we're flying in an airplane, unfortunately, the semicircular canals don't respond the way that they do on the ground. It's a very unnatural environment for human beings. We're not evolved to adapt to that environment. And so our semicircular canals fail us. And so it's necessary for a VFR pilot, in order to literally stay upright, to be able to see out the window, which means that a VFR pilot, somebody who's flying under visual flight rules, has to be able to see at least a margin of a horizon, which means they're going to be restricted to a clearance of 3 miles. They have to keep 3 miles visibility. So at the very least, that gives them enough to be able to see that horizon and operate the aircraft safely. You also need to be able to see other aircraft. So VFR flight doesn't require any control by air traffic control. We don't have to tell anybody we're going. That's always the question that I get. I say, oh, we're going to go to Southern New Jersey today. And they say, people will tell me, oh, wow, do you have to file this flight plan and that? And the other thing? I said, no, we're just going to go on the runway and take off. And that's it. And we'll keep going. As long as we're VFR and I can see and avoid other aircraft, that's fine. That's legal. I can't fly at altitudes above 18,000 feet MSL. That's okay with me, because above 12,000 feet, 12,500 feet MSL, I'm going to need oxygen anyhow. And oxygen is not a fun thing to wear on a regular basis. Up there, the pressures are so small and I'm so low, and I'm flying an unpressurized aircraft that personally I would never go above 18,000 feet anyhow. So that's not a concern for me. I can go almost anywhere, and I don't really have to talk to anyone. There's some airspaces that we'll talk about that I do need to get a clearance into. And what that means is I just need to call the air traffic controller on the radio and sort of say, hey, I'm here, can I come in? There are very rare times that I've ever been told, no, you can't go this way. It does happen, but it's very, very rare. So usually the air traffic controllers are very accommodating, and they tell us, yeah, sure, come on, go through this way. And we have technical jargon to say exactly that, as opposed to, yeah, come on, it's great over here. IFR rules are much more restrictive. IFR rules require that the pilot be able to see and avoid, but only when able. So if there's a VFR pilot that's staying legal and outside of clouds and away from clouds, and an IFR pilot is flying nearby, well, air traffic control might be able to tell us about that other aircraft, but it's also possible that they know nothing about that other airplane. It's also possible that that airplane isn't an airplane. It's powered parachutes we talked about in the first Tandon Teaches Aviation. Those don't show up on radar. They don't show up on anything. So we call it the Mark I eyeball. You have to be able to see outside. And if we're flying under IFR, but in visual conditions, we're still going to have our eyes out the window and looking for all those things, because those other guys might not see us. And it's better to have two people looking at each other, looking for each other, rather than just one. If we're inside of the clouds, well, that's when ATC is going to keep us separated. So anybody that's flying inside instrument meteorological conditions, IMC, will have to be flying under instrument flight rules. We can fly at any altitudes between basically the surface and 60,000 feet, which you can't survive up beyond 60,000 feet. And we have to follow common flight paths. Now, it may be odd to think that there are highways in the sky, because why not just have everybody go wherever they want to? And that might work, except it's total anarchy and they don't like us to do that. So they put us on airways, which are highways in the sky, or jet routes if we're up high, which are, again, highways in higher altitude sky. We have to follow ATC instructions when we're under IFR. So that means having radio contact at all times with air traffic control. And air traffic control is going to give us a route to follow, and we're going to follow that route. And if they need us to deviate, they'll tell us to deviate. They'll tell us turn left 10 degrees, turn right 10 degrees, and so on and so forth. So obviously we have lots of different kinds of aircraft, and I'm missing one picture. Oh no, oh, I'm missing one picture out of this. I don't know where it went, but there was another picture here. This is an example of a really VFR aircraft. That's actually, it's called a Piper Cub. And that's one of the original Cubs, a J3 Cub that was manufactured, I think, in 1940 something. Anyhow, it's really, really old. It has absolutely no electrical system. There's no electrical system in that entire airplane. There's no starter, there's no button to push, there's no switches, there's no lights, there's no radios. There's literally nothing in that airplane except engine, wings, landing gear, ailerons, flaps, this stuff that, no flaps, excuse me, ailerons, elevator, and rudder that we talked about at the Tandon Teaches last time. So that type of aircraft can't communicate with air traffic control, and so it definitely can't be VFR. Right? There are some aircraft, and that's unfortunately the picture that I'm missing, that can fly VFR or IFR. The aircraft that I own, which I can, hold on, I can show you that one. That one. Can you see that? I hope you can see that. If you can see that, then that airplane can fly VFR or IFR as I see fit. So whenever I choose to go IFR, I can file a flight plan and fly IFR. And if I don't want to, I can just go VFR. Likewise, we have, this is one of my favorite aircraft. It's a TBM 850. Very fast, very high altitude, lots of comfort, beautiful airplane. It looks sleek. If I win the lottery, that's what I'm buying. That is mostly an IFR aircraft, and that's why I kind of put it right here on the line. They certainly can fly VFR, but in order to get optimal altitudes and speed, optimal engine performance and speeds, they're going to fly higher, and so therefore they have to have instrument flight rules. And then you've got your standard Airbus A320 here, which is always flying IFR. This is a transport category airplane. This is what you fly in when you get a ticket from New York to San Francisco. They're always going to be flying IFR from start to finish because it's a protected environment. It's the easy environment. It's really actually kind of funny when you see a jet pilot, somebody who's been flying IFR in the system for a really long time. They come back, and I had one experience where a guy came back. This is 12 or probably about 12 years ago. The guy came back to general aviation flying, and he wanted to fly something more akin to the Piper Cub. And I said, okay, well, let's go out to the airplane and we'll take off. And he said, but wait, we need to file this paperwork and that paperwork and the other paperwork. And I sort of laughed and said, no, let's just go fly. And he realized that he hadn't actually flown VFR in decades, almost decades, because all of his flying was in this very regimented, rigid system of the airline industry. And just going up for a quick run around the pattern with a Piper Cub was completely outside of his norm. In addition to that, we've got different kinds of now I can't get through. We've got different kinds of airports. And unfortunately, that image in the middle is not the best image. But if you can see this here, this is a grass strip. Okay, there's a grass runway right there. That's actually one of my favorite runways to go up to because there's a little restaurant right over here. And we can go up and land on the grass, park right over here, walk across the field, and go have lunch at the restaurant. So that's nice and easy. This is another one of my favorite airports. This is actually Andover, New Jersey. It's right near, I think it's called Kittatinny State Park, which starts literally right here. So we'll fly up, especially during these times. They open this up on March 2nd, I think, and on March 3rd, my family, May 2nd, and on May 3rd, we flew in and we, went fishing on the lake and hiking through the woods, and it's a great socially distant environment. And then we got back on the plane and flew home. So that's a little airport. The strip is very short. It's only about 1,900 feet long, and if you go too far on the runway, then you end up getting a little wet. And then we've got this nice big airport, which you might be familiar with. If you've flown into New York City, you probably flew into this airport. This is John F. Kennedy International Airport in Queens. And in the center here are all the terminals, and then these runways. This runway right here is 3 miles long. It's 15,000 feet long. It's just about 3 miles long. So if you do the quick calculation, it's about 7.5 times as long as this runway. So you can fit 7.5 of these runways on this one right here. Not to mention it's wide enough that you can fit almost anything. So real big diversity in the types of airports as well. And remember that coming off of any one of these, you could be VFR or IFR. And then we take a look at the different flight paths. I just took these two. This one I decided to go out and do some, I think I was doing my night landings. And I went out, the blue line would be the direct route between the airports, and the red line is what I actually flew. I've got a little logger inside the aircraft that keeps track of where I'm going. I just took off and flew around. I flew up to the Statue of Liberty. I did a landing at Newark International Airport because it was just after COVID started. And then I circled around Staten Island for a little while looking at something. And then I went back and did 2 more landings at my home airport, Old Bridge, New Jersey. So that was kind of just a fun flight. I wanted to go out. It was night. I wanted to see the statue at night, get out of my house because I've been stuck for a while due to COVID, and just get a little exercise for the airplane. This one was a longer flight that I did a couple of weeks ago. It was out to an airport in Maryland when they weren't on the New York State restricted list. And I flew out to pick up, there were, how many puppies did we? We did a puppy rescue flight with, I think 2 or 3 puppies that we brought back. So we do a lot of these animal rescue flights where we need transport from kill shelters and that sort. They were coming from Texas, and mine was the last leg of the flight from Texas. Oh, it was two. Mine was the last leg of the flight from Texas, and they were landing at Old Bridge, and they're in a rescue that specializes in their breed here in New Jersey. So this was an IFR flight, which is why it was taken completely out of the way. And then coming back, I think that was a VFR flight. So how do we decide? Well, first off, what airport is nearby where we want to go? What are the capabilities of the airplane? So if the airplane is VFR only, then that decides the factor. How's the weather? If the weather's good, I would prefer to just go VFR. If the weather's bad, then I might choose IFR depending on whether it's bad or just kind of not great. Are you legally current to make the flight? There's a lot of legal requirements for what we have to do to maintain currency, to maintain our abilities to fly in the clouds or not. And then how much extra time are we going to spend en route? As you can see from that picture, the IFR flight took us way out of our direct route, and the VFR flight back took us a lot more direct. So do we want to make that IFR flight and add on 10%, possibly 20% to the total time en route, or do we just poke our way through? The IFR leg out was because there was low weather in the morning, and we had to. So now that we're about 1 to 7 days prior to the flight, what I would be doing would be choosing the destination, like actually choosing what airport I would be going to. Very often there's 2 or 3 airports nearby where I would want to go. And so I would make the decision about which of the 2 or 3 airports I would actually be landing at. Finding ground transportation, this is just the bane of a pilot's existence, because when you get there, you don't have your car, right? You can't taxi the airplane off the airport. They really get annoyed when I try and taxi down the highway. I just figure, take the wings off or something, but you can't do that. So ground transportation becomes a big issue, and there's lots of ways to deal with this. Some people carry a bike in the airplane. They have folding bikes. Some people now carry electric scooters on board the airplane. They'll run with an electric scooter. There's one guy that likes his one wheel, right? And it has a little power, and then can jump on the one wheel and go wherever he wants to. Lately, it's gotten a lot easier thanks to Uber and Lyft. So usually when we get on the ground, if we don't have a planned pickup from a friend or whoever we're going to visit, then my wife will pull out her phone while I'm packing up the airplane, and she'll bang the Uber, and Uber will be there in 5 or 6 minutes, and then we're off. So that has certainly helped find ground transportation. It used to be that taxi cabs would put their phone numbers and business cards on the wall of the buildings around the airport just so that we could find them. I'd be looking at weather, and that's one of the things I'm going to be doing today with you guys for my flight on Saturday, and figuring out how the weather is going to look when we get to actual departure time. There's no guarantees, but if, for example, I were looking at going to Louisiana over the weekend, I might might second guess myself going to Louisiana, because they have a hurricane coming. And so that might be a reason to revise my plans or cancel my plans altogether and get refunds on my hotels and stuff like that. Double checking the maintenance logs. So for my airplane that I own, I know what the maintenance status is at all times, and that's easy to do. But I would be checking to make sure that I'm not flying over limitations, making sure that the hours are up to date, so that anything that requires the maintenance officers, the mechanics, to take a look at the airplane has been looked at and done. Those guys are 9 to 5, Monday to Friday type thing. And if I get out there on a Saturday morning and find that I'm missing an inspection that had to be due, that only takes 10 minutes to do, I can't do it myself. And so the airplane would be grounded, and that would ruin my trip. Updating charts. So we have an enormous number of maps that we have to carry, and thankfully now they all come in the form of an iPad, so that made things a lot easier. But we used to have just piles and piles of charts and books. When I started flying, we had a chart subscription, which cost me about $400 a year, so that they would send me the updated charts automatically, and I'd always have a constantly updated chart. Now I pay a subscription fee to ForeFlight, which is about $100. I pay for the more expensive one, of course, so it's about $200. But I tap a button on ForeFlight on my iPad, and it starts downloading all the charts from my iPad and gets everything ready. And then I'll be checking batteries in my headset, making sure I keep some aspirin in my flight bag, making sure that stuff is all set up. So then the same day, we'll be calling for a pre-flight briefing, and I'll show you how to do that on ForeFlight now. And then we'll be looking at current conditions, forecast conditions, any flight restrictions. When the president travels, for example, there's a 30-mile radius around, a circle that's 30-mile radius around the president that we're not allowed to fly without talking to air traffic control. And then there's a 10-mile inner core around the president where we're just not allowed to fly at all. So I'll want to know if, for example, he's making a visit, or now that Vice President Biden has the nomination for the Democrats, then his house or in Delaware has a temporary flight restriction. These little flight restrictions come up every once in a while, And you'll hear about them in the news when somebody doesn't do their due diligence and blunders into one. It does happen, unfortunately, but we're supposed to be checking those in a pre-flight briefing and making sure that we're not flying into that airspace. And then we'll be looking at notices to airmen, where we, if a runway is closed or a taxiway is closed or some navigation service is out, or maybe the destination airport that I'm going to go to ran out of gas, that happens, or their fuel pumps broke and they don't have any fuel, then that would be information I'd want to know before I get there and try and get gas, and then I have a huge problem. So I'm going to show you here a, I stop sharing for a second, and then I will show you the screen. Just give me 1 second. All right. All right. So this is an application called 4Flight. It is came out in about, I think, 2010, maybe a little bit later than that. And it's really revolutionized a lot of what we do with pre-flight planning. So in order to draw a line, for example, if I'm going to go from my airport, which is Old Bridge, New Jersey, 3 November 6, this weekend I'm going to go down to Millville, M-I-V. I can put in that information and it will show me a nice pretty line of where I'm going. All right, and as I zoom out, those little markers are actually traffic right now. So I'm able to see what aircraft are where right now. That's based on flight trackers and things like websites like FlightAware. I think it actually pulls directly from FlightAware. But it's going to show me the different airspaces. I'm looking at it on a map. This is called an aeronautical sectional chart. And I'll see the different airspaces that I might encounter along the way and what I should do about them. So it looks like my route takes me directly over McGuire Air Force Base. So that's something that I would consider. Do I want to go directly over McGuire Air Force Base? They have restricted airspaces and things like this. So I'd be conscious of the fact that I'd be moving around possibly big jets and transport category aircraft. Thankfully, I can choose my aircraft in the upper left. There, it's November 5341 Echo. That's my aircraft. What power setting I want to use on board that aircraft. I have power settings for when I want to save gas, as well as average power settings, as well as, oh my God, we're late, we have to get there fast. And then I could choose the altitude that I want to fly, and that's about it. If I send that to the flight screen, I'm going to be able to generate a briefing. And this is going to go out and collect all the weather, as well as all the notices to airmen, temporary flight restrictions, everything for right now. So this is something that I'd be doing the morning of when I'm getting ready, or about 2 hours prior to takeoff. And I'm going to be looking at turbulence. I'm going to be looking at, let's see, this looks like a pretty bad day to fly if I were doing it. There's pilot reports. I have a whole slew of information that I have to go through, that I myself, as the pilot in command of the aircraft, have to look at and make sure that I can make this flight based on the current conditions, based on the forecast conditions, based on everything that I'm supposed to know about is going to happen. So there's certainly a lot here, and I don't want to spend too much time going over that, but this used to all be printed. And when you'd get a printout of your pre-flight briefing, or when you'd call a phone number to hear about it over the air, you would end up taking notes. The printed briefing took about 15 to 20 pages, depending on how far the flight was, and you'd have to know everything about every line on the flight. Not that you could, that's physically impossible, but you're supposed to. And when you call for a briefing, it usually takes about 10 or 15 minutes for the pre-flight briefer to tell you everything that's going on. Nick, I will actually get to that question slightly later in the slideshow, so I'll just ask you to hold that for a sec. We then have to plan the flight, which thankfully 4Flight will do that for us. But if we did it the original way. I didn't do this. This was actually a student, a friend of mine. I'm teaching him to fly, and so he had to do this for his flight. I guess on June 8th, it's what it looks like. He on June 8th flew alone from Central Jersey Airport over to that's Arner Memorial Airport in the Poconos in Pennsylvania, and he had to plan the flight. Now, he doesn't file this with anyone. He simply gives it to me, and I keep it as a record of the fact that he's done his work in identifying where he's going to go, how long it's going to take him, how much fuel he's going to burn, when he's going to get there, what altitudes he's going to use, what frequencies he's going to talk to, so that he's flown that entire flight in his head prior to even getting anywhere near the airplane. So I know that he's identified Solberg VOR, which is a big white cone that you can actually see from the sky. Sky Manor Airport, which is another airport. It looks like he has I can't read with antennas on the left, Braden on the right. So we identified a kind of a visual checkpoint where you could say, oh, I've got these antenna towers over there, and I've got this other airport over here, and I'm going to fly right between them. So he's identified all the points on the map that he's going to use to navigate that flight, and that's his plan. Then we'd look at the weight and balance. Now, this is more engineering than I think I probably want to get into, but those of you that are mechanical engineers and talk about center of gravities and center of lift and that type of thing, this might totally be in your ballpark. We need to make sure that, according to the manufacturer, the center of gravity of the airplane on takeoff and on landing and throughout the flight needs to be maintained between particular boundaries. And that's basically, if you load the airplane too heavy in the back, the nose wants to go up and you might not be able to push forward. And if you load the airplane too heavy in the front, you might not be able to pick the nose up on takeoff. So we have these very small center of gravity limits that we need to load the airplane. Now, the pilots on board a commercial aircraft have software that does all this for them, but as as Americans, we tend to be a little bit larger than normal. A couple of years ago, there was a problem where an aircraft had difficulty departing, difficulty taking off, and the FAA went back and said, well, you were out of the center of gravity of limits based on our calculations. And they said, well, but we're assuming that each person is 175 pounds. And the FAA sort of scratched their head and said, yeah, that used to be true when we published that in the 1960s, but now that's not true anymore. And so as a result of, the size of the average American, these softwares had to be completely adjusted because the commercial flights don't weigh you. They don't put you on a scale and weigh you. In a small airplane like mine, we would definitely weigh the passengers and the bags and all of that to make sure that we're within those center of gravity limits. But on a big commercial airplane, they just assume you're about 175 pounds. But the unfortunate case was that the FAA started to look at the averages of the weights of American passengers, and it had gone up significantly. And now they use something closer to, I think it's 200 pounds as the average weight for passengers in America. And then they have an average baggage weight, although they probably weigh that as well, and then cargo weights. And this is a very complex calculation. The pilot in command, the captain, is not going to do that calculation. He's going to let the software do that calculation, and it'll spit out a number and say, yeah, you're good. And it'll tell him everything that he needs to know. But these calculations have to be done by us, by the pilots, for smaller aircraft. So at a small airport, there's not going to be a tower. You're not going to have a control tower that tells you anything about where to go. So now we've gotten in the airplane, loaded it up, checked the weight and balance, everything's okay. Everybody's strapped in. I've done my pre-cabin briefing, which, in case you guys are interested, the exits are over here, and in an emergency, then your life vest is underneath your seat. So I got through my passenger, and there's no smoking on board this flight, and make sure to stay in your seat at all times because, well, you can't otherwise. But we're on the ground, we'll be maneuvering around. We don't have a control tower. There's 5,000 airports in the United States. There's 5,000 airports in the United States, and there's only about 500 that have control towers. And that means that 90% of the airports in the United States have nobody there. There's nobody telling us what to do. So how do we do it? Well, every airport will have its own air traffic frequency that we call the Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. And what we do is tune in that frequency and tell everybody where we're going and what we're doing. And in an airplane like the Piper Cub, where we don't have a radio, that's okay. We don't need one. We'll use that Mark 1 eyeball and look out the window and make sure that there's nobody else coming and we're not getting in the way. And that's kind of the easiest way that we can work around these low density airports that don't have a lot of people. At a larger airport, like John F. Kennedy, you're going to have an air traffic controller, and they're going to be there 24 hours a day, and they're going to tell you exactly where to go and what to do. So this is John F. Kennedy International Airport. This is the current diagram, and you can see these big black lines are the runways. These little gray lines are all the taxiways. So once you get off the runway, you're going to be on one of these taxiways, and every taxiway has an identification for it. Here's taxiway A for Alpha. We say Alpha taxiway. Here's Gulf taxiway, Hotel taxiway, Bravo taxiway. There are so many taxiways at John F. Kennedy International Airport that you end up actually using two letters. Like you've got the November Alpha and November Charlie taxiways, the Quebec 5 taxiway, the Papa Bravo taxiway. I think it's right about here. Yeah, right about here is the really interesting one where if you've been to JFK, you'll actually see aircraft that are on the Alpha and Bravo taxiways taxi over the road that leads into John F. Kennedy International Airport. Yeah, they actually taxi over the road on a bridge. So that's pretty cool. So I just wanted to let you guys hear what it sounds like, and I'm hoping that you guys will be able to hear this, what it sounds like when we have a clearance. So here we go. Were you guys able to hear that? All right. It's very quiet. Okay, hang on one second. Let's see if we can, let me share. I'm going to share it with the audio. Oh, that's why. All right, I didn't share the audio. Let me try that one more time.
Ground, good evening, Swiss 15 X-ray Heavy on hotel approaching Alpha.
Swiss 15 X-ray Heavy, can good evening, taxi to runway 13 right via right Bravo and Papa.
Right Bravo, Papa to runway 13 right, Swiss 15 X-ray Heavy.
All right, so what that was, and I'll give you a little help there. He said Swiss 15 X-ray Heavy, that's the call sign for that aircraft. We're at hotel approaching Alpha. Okay, and the controller cleared him taxi via Hotel Bravo Papa. So that's Hotel Bravo and Papa up to runway 13 right. And so they gave him an instruction on exactly how to go. And if there were multiple aircraft along the way, the air traffic controller would be giving them guidance, each one as to how to get to the runway that they're assigned to. All right, so that's the little route that they used. Okay. Once we get to the end of the runway and the airplane's all configured and ready to go, well, when the pilot's ready to depart at a smaller airport, we look up the other end of the runway, we look up this side of the runway to make sure nobody's coming, and we go. And that's all it is. We literally see and avoid. So if there's no control tower there, we'll just look out the window and make sure that nobody's coming along, and we will take off. Kind of the same way that you do when you pull your car out of your driveway. Nobody tells you you're cleared to pull out of your driveway onto the street. You just look up the road and make sure nobody's coming, and then you pull out onto your driveway. So I thought you guys might enjoy a little video of that.
Old Bridge traffic, Bonanza's departing runway 24, remaining in the pattern, Old Bridge.
I look up the runway, I look up the other direction of the runway, taxi onto the runway. Sounds terrible. And that's it. We're in the air. At a larger airport, we'd be waiting for a takeoff clearance. So you might hear something like this. This is actually the same guy at Kennedy who taxied to runway 13 right, and now he's waiting for his takeoff clearance.
15 X-ray heavy, runway 13 right cleared for takeoff. Runway 13 right cleared for takeoff, this is 15 X-ray heavy.
Much easier, nothing that the pilot has to do. The air traffic controller is taking responsibility for making sure that there's nobody else, nothing on that runway, and he clears the pilot for takeoff. The pilot reads back, and then they're out of there. That's it. Much easier.
15 X-ray.
All right. So there was the question in the chat. I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was that asked the question in the chat. Was it Nick? Nick asked, what are those concentric circles? Well, those concentric circles are actually differences in airspace. So we've got lots of airspace, and they're all predicated on distances from different airports. This big blue line that you're seeing right here, that's called a Class Bravo airspace. For the most part, the airspace that we fly in doesn't require a clearance. We don't have to tell anybody that we're going to be there. We don't have to ask for permission to go anywhere. We literally take off and don't worry about it. That's either called Class Gulf airspace or Class Echo airspace, G or E. The Gulf airspace is very, very low, and the E goes all the way up to 18,000 feet. But those airspaces we can fly in, we don't have to talk to anybody as long as we can maintain visual separation from clouds and other aircraft. But inside this big blue line, as I'm sure you can imagine, because it's the very dense airspace that leads into Kennedy, LaGuardia, and Newark, those are going to require us to have a clearance. We're going to have to talk to the air traffic controller and make sure that he knows that we're inside there and get permission to be inside there. So unfortunately, these are maps that are predicated on two-dimensional space. So you're going to see little marks like this, which indicates that this is Class Bravo airspace starting at 3,000 feet. We always add 2 zeros, 3,000 feet, and ending at 7,000 feet. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means if I'm there, if I'm in this point in two-dimensional space, and in my third dimension, I'm at 3,000 to 7,000 feet, then I have to be talking to air traffic control before I get there. But does that mean you could fly directly over New York City at 7,001 feet? The answer is absolutely yes. There is no clearance required. You don't have to talk to anybody. I can fly overhead Tandon at 7,001 feet all the way up to 18,000 feet, and I don't have to talk to anybody. Okay, and I can do that, and that's fine. The same holds true out here. This is a slightly smaller airport. This is Allentown, Bethlehem, Easton, or Allentown, Pennsylvania. That airport is going to be a Class Charlie airport. You'll just notice that the dimensions of this airspace are a lot smaller than the dimensions of this airspace. This is usually about 20 miles. This is usually about 10 miles, so it's half the radius. And the heights are a lot smaller too, 4,000 feet versus 7,000 feet. And then we've got this type of airspace around an airport that has a smaller control tower. Trenton, New Jersey has a control tower, and that control tower requires us to contact the dashed line requires us to contact the control tower before we enter. So those concentric circles, Nick, to answer your question, relate to the types of airspaces and what we have to do in order to get into that airspace. Now, if we're IFR, then the IFR traffic is going to follow a clearance, and this is going to be real hard to hear and kind of messy.
Air Delivery, good morning, citation 839 Juliet Sierra, good morning,
November 839 Juliet Sierra, swing expert to the Palomar Airport via the Zephyr 6 departure, Derby transition as filed, trying to get the SID. Departure frequency 119.2, squawk 3722.
So that's an IFR clearance.
This is the Zephyr 6 Derby, climate function.
Oops. That's an IFR clearance. That's somebody asking, he's still on the ground, and he's asking for a clearance all the way. Now, once we have an IFR clearance, we follow our IFR clearance all the way to our destination. So once they give us the route, which are highways in the sky, so it's sort of the same as saying when you used to print out MapQuest directions, something like that. You'd say, okay, we're going to take Smith Street up to Tillery Street, and then we're going to jump on the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. We're going to take I-278 all the way up to the Whitestone Bridge. We get those kinds of instructions, but in the sky. And then once we depart, we can follow those instructions all the way until we land. And if we lose communications, we've already been given a clearance. We don't have to worry about any airspace. We don't have to worry about anything else. We're allowed to fly our clearance all the way through to the destination. So those clearances are kind of predicated on the idea that we might get off the ground and immediately lose radio contact. And air traffic control is going to know exactly where we're going because they've been giving us a direction, a way to get there prior to us even taking off. And that's something that a lot of students have a real problem with, is that the fact that we're in the sky means we're kind of on our own. You don't have the internet. You don't have connectivity to everybody. You can't look things up on Google about how you're supposed to do this and how you're supposed to do that. You're pretty much on your own up there, and you better know what you're doing. So for IFR traffic, one of the things that you might recognize is that you're going to see traffic passing over your head always at the same point. So if you were to stand in, let's say the quad, if you were going to stand right outside between 5 and 6 Metrotech, if you look towards 15 Metrotech on any given day, you're going to see traffic going from right to left that's landing LaGuardia Airport. So that traffic, whenever LaGuardia is landing to the north, they're landing on runway 4, that traffic is going to be flying right over that point. And you'll see the airplanes follow one right after the other, right after the other, right after the other. They follow a perfect line. And that's because they're following either an instrument approach procedure or a standard terminal arrival route. And we have the same thing for departure. We have a standard instrument departure or a standard terminal arrival route. If you've ever gone to the beach in Brooklyn, you know that you're going to see that traffic that comes off of JFK flies basically right over the Canarsie, sorry, right over, no, it is Canarsie, flies right over Canarsie, and then climbs out over the Atlantic Ocean. So you'll see that as you're on the beach, every airplane is flying right over the exact same path. It's that standardization that air traffic control can just say, oh, you're cleared via the Canarsie climb, or the Gateway climb, or the Idlewild climb, that we know exactly where we're supposed to go, what we're supposed to do, what altitudes we're supposed to fly, and it's easy for us to communicate with those standardized mechanisms. And then inbound, we would be cleared for the arrival, and we'd go to Kingston, which is in upstate New York, and then to Dorey intersection, and then to Lendy, and then into LaGuardia, VOR, and then down into Kennedy Airport. So these are standardized ways. So when you look up and you're constantly seeing airplanes over the exact same route over and over and over again, that's because they're flying one of these routes at low altitudes when they're on the approach or when they're getting ready to land. They're always going to be flying over the exact same points. It's standardization. For landing, it's sort of just as in takeoff. There's, non-towered airports. We look at the runway, we look at the traffic in the area, and we decide when we're going to land. For a towered airport, same sort of thing. We call the air traffic control tower when we're 5 miles or 10 miles out. They let us in, they tell us when to land, where to land, and that's that. and then they tell us where to taxi after we're done. So landing is just exactly the same as takeoff. It's in reverse. Everything's standardized. Now, there's always situations which don't fall into these perfect little ideas. We have, for example, weather, and I had this YouTube video, and I wanted to bring it up. The audio is just obnoxious, so I'll turn off the audio. But this is an old video that I have from when some weather came into Memphis. So Memphis is the hub for Federal Express. So all those little airplanes are airplanes landing into Memphis, and that red and green is thunderstorms that are on their way. You see they're all following nice little lines, getting ready to land. Everybody's lining up nicely, just like ducks in a row. And the air traffic controllers are working very heartily, very busy, getting all those airplanes. And by the way, those are all FedEx airplanes going into Memphis until the thunderstorms get really close. And planes don't like to fly in thunderstorms, so everybody scatters. And now it's a big old mess with everybody trying to figure out where to go, because remember, the gas tanks are starting to empty out, and they finally move off, the thunderstorms move off, and then the planes start to come in. So I thought that was a really interesting video of the anarchy that happens after weather starts to move in, or there starts to be mechanical problems or anything like that. Emergencies do happen, right? We have the possibility for having an emergency. Plans can change, and then sometimes plans change again. So there's always an amount of planning that we're doing, even on board the aircraft. We're always looking at the situation and making decisions. When a flight is easy, well, that's not a problem. We can do the original plan, and we have those backup plans just in case, and we never use them. That's fine. But when things start to go awry, an airport closes because of weather or because of mechanical difficulties of an airplane on the runway or whatever happens, the fuel is always being burned out of the tanks, and you know, when the fuel dissipates completely, then we have a very, very big problem. So we never get to that point. We'll always be planning ahead of time. And you may say, you know, you might be on a flight at some point, and the pilot comes on and says, I'm sorry, we can't land at Kennedy. We're going to land in Boston and pick up more gas. It might be a huge inconvenience, but always remember that that pilot is doing that for your safety. The intent is that you're going to be safe, and it's better to be on the ground safe in Boston and have your trip a little bit made more difficult. The airline will get you to New York. Don't worry about it. You might have to finish up on a bus, but it's better to be safe on the ground than worrying about gas in the air. So always remember that despite the fact that you're inconvenienced, the pilots are doing that so that you can maintain safety. All right. That's about all I had. I did want to show you the weather. I'll just show you what I see for weather. I could probably pull it up right here. So I use this crazy little thing called Weather Spork. And this is what I'm looking at, like 1 to 7 days out. And I've got a flight from Trenton, and I'm going to Millville. And this gives me a quick little view of what I can expect I'm going Saturday at 9 a.m. So there's no precipitation in the forecast, so that's a great thing. And it looks like there's really no clouds, very little clouds, high clouds. I do have a little bit of wind, but ultimately it looks like it's going to be a nice, pretty flight from Trenton down to Millville on Saturday. All right. So we're coming up on 3 o'clock here, and I wanted to leave some time for anybody who had questions. So I'll open the floor for any questions. What do you guys think?
I've got a question.
Oh, yeah, go for it, Nick.
So I know you already did a talk about this, which I haven't seen, but let's say you're like a broke grad student trying to get into hobby flying as cheaply as possible. What do you recommend?
Well, if you just want to get in the air, there's a couple of options. One is a glider, which obviously doesn't have a lot of, doesn't have any engine power, and it's relatively inexpensive. There's also something that's come to light in the past couple of years, which are ultralights. These could be as small as something like a powered parachute. And the powered parachute, you can rent, you can buy. There's inexpensive options. It's basically like a lawnmower strapped to your back. And what you're going to do is have an inflatable wing, which looks like a parachute, and you'll pull the parachute up like a kite. It'll be above you, and then start the engine, and it's pushing you, and that's creating lift inside the parachute. So that's one option for something that you might be interested in to get flying. I'm trying to think. Gliders are a great option also. They're a little bit more expensive than the powered parachute, but there are more options for going around renting. For example, as a student, you'd be able to rent a glider with an instructor, get a tow up to altitude, and the tows usually cost, like, I think it's $25 to 2,000 feet, and you could join a club for a glider, where you're paying basically just at the hourly rate for the glider, like 25 bucks. And you've got, an hour's worth of fun flying for maybe $50 or so, $75, which is, I think, pretty good for a grad student. It's about the cost of a dinner and a movie. Does that make
Great,
sense?
thank you. I'll look into that.
Yeah, there's lots of glider clubs around the United States. You can look at the SSA, the Soaring Society of America. They'll have lists of all the glider flying clubs. Powered flying, for an hour of flight, you're looking at closer to double that, at least, like $200 an hour, where, I understand it gets, a little expensive at that point just for fun. So that might not be available. But if you're interested in, like, going to Florida, for example, you might be able to get rentals on powered parachutes. I'm trying to think of the organization that does powered parachutes, and I can't think of it off the top of my head right now. But powered parachutes and gliders would be the really minimal inexpensive way of going. Or models. Model airplane flying is a lot of fun. I did models for a number of years as well.
Daniel, there's a question in the chat. Do you have any opinions on the new Microsoft Flight Simulator?
Oh, so I've been, as I'm sure you guys have, I've been buried since the beginning of the semester. I'm teaching a lot of classes this semester, and I haven't even had time to download the new flight simulator. I know that seems horrible, right? I should totally have done that. I didn't. I'm sorry. But I've seen the graphics off of it, and I'm a flight simulator fan from back in the days. My first was Flight Simulator, I think 3, which was back around 91, maybe 92, somewhere in that range. I definitely have had Flight Simulator 3 and 4 and Flight Simulator 95. MSFS 2000 was actually a really important part in the way I learned to fly in clouds. I'd load that up, fly a simulated instrument flight from start to finish, shoot a couple of approaches. I even had friends that would come over and play air traffic control for me, and they could even be the instructor and give me simulated instrument failures and engine failures and problems and all of this in the comfort of my own home that cost, what, $45 or something like that. So it was a really, really cheap way for me to get practice when the engine wasn't running and I wasn't paying for it. And I did that a lot for just practice. So I'm an absolute fan of X-Plane and Flight Simulator, but I don't have any experience with the new one, only because it came out just about a month ago, I think about a month ago, and I was going crazy with prepping my classes for the fall semester. So unfortunately, I don't have any comments, but if it's anything like the older versions, wow, yeah, definitely important stuff and great fun. I think at this point I probably have more hours in an actual airplane than I did in the flight simulator, but it was close for a lot of years, let me tell you. Anything else?
Hi.
Hey, Abdel?
Yeah. I'm Abdel. I'm still like confused, but not confused, but undecided. I'm studying mechanical engineering, and I'm really interested in joining the aviation field. But I was wondering if it's a good idea to finish my bachelor in mechanical engineering before taking the step to the aviation field. I don't know. What do you think?
When you say the aviation field, it's like saying I want to be a doctor. Okay, well that makes sense, but there's so many specialties in the aviation field. Aeronautical engineering is really important and is a great opportunity in the aviation field. But are you talking about engineering? Are you talking about being a pilot? Are you talking about being a mechanic? Are you talking about there's so many options.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Actually, I'm talking about being pilot because I did few simulator flight before.
Yep.
I really liked it, yeah.
So for the past 20 years, and I'll say that, for the past 20 years, there's been almost a mandatory requirement that you must have a 4-year degree in order to be a captain or a first officer on board an airline. There's no legal requirement for that, but the airlines have so many possible candidates that one of the distinctions was, does this person have a 4-year degree? And so it really does make sense that even if you're thinking of being a pilot, to finish up on a 4-year degree. Now, the other thing now, let's talk this year, there's a lot of pilots who got a degree as a, not to be disparaging towards anybody, but as a librarian, okay? And then they said, well, okay, I have a 4-year degree, but now I'm gonna go be a pilot. Well, when the airline industry took a pretty severe hit back in March, a lot of these pilots are now furloughed and they don't have a job. And so we expect that, obviously once the industry turns around, which it will, those pilots will be hired back and everything will be fine. But right now there's quite a lot of pilots, mechanics, flight attendants out looking for jobs. And if you have a good degree, like mechanical engineering, I would say would be a great degree, then you have the opportunity for a backup career if you get furloughed from an airline. So I would say definitely don't quit your degree program now. Definitely not.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure. Russell, has the presence of drones in the air changed the way that you or others are flying? Do you think that increased drone traffic will change the way that human pilots will fly in the near future? Great question. So first off, the unmanned aerial systems, UASs, there's a large range of what we're talking about there. There's everything down from these little racing drones. I have a friend that flies these racing drones, and I have no idea how he could even keeps track of where this thing is in the air. But there's those all the way up to literally 100, 150-pound camera platforms for movies. And there's a big diversity in what's out there flying. So when you talk about a drone, you kind of got to be a little bit more specific in what class of aircraft you're talking about. Do I worry about the racing drones? Not at all. I don't worry about the little DJIs. The DJIs have a nice little piece of software that inherently stops them from flying around airports and from flying in restricted airspaces and from flying within temporary flight restrictions. Now, most of those aircraft, most of those drones don't go above 400 feet. And the lowest I'm going to go, unless I'm taking off or landing, is going to be about 1,000 feet. I don't go any lower than that anyhow unless I'm taking off or landing. So for the most part, the idea of separation is done on a 3-dimensional scale so that I'm up higher and they're down lower and they can do whatever they want down there, and that's not going to bother me. This does pose problems. There was a case over Staten Island, actually, a number of years ago, where a pilot in Brooklyn flew a Phantom 4, a DJI Phantom 4, over to Staten Island, which is outside the line of sight. Now, this is completely illegal. He was doing so at about 400 feet, which is kind of questionable. But he was also doing so inside a temporary flight restriction because President Trump was nearby. So we've got somebody who's not keeping an eye on their drone, somebody who was flying illegally. And by the way, there was a helicopter that he couldn't see the drone. And so the helicopter ended up hitting the drone and causing quite a large amount of damage to this, I think it was a Black Hawk helicopter, a military helicopter. I do worry about drones a little bit, especially when I'm approaching an airport and somebody thinks, oh, it might be fun to go up and put my drone right in the flight path of the local airport and get some great pictures of airplanes. And I've seen videos of that on the internet, and I think, my God, this could be catastrophic. Hitting something like a bird at 150 miles an hour destroys the windshield, usually injures the pilots, oftentimes, gives them blindness, and certainly causes an emergency. And that's just a bird that weighs a couple of pounds. If you were to hit something harder, that could be very much catastrophic to an aircraft. And there have been cases where aircraft have hit drones. So that does worry me. Do I think that the increased drone traffic is going to change the way that we're going to fly in the near future? I don't. And I think that the FAA has a pretty good handle on what's going on with drones. They're going to allow, I think they should and will allow companies like Amazon to fly drones. And I do think that at some point, your Domino's pizza order will be delivered by drone. I don't think that's anytime soon, but I do think that that kind of thing is coming to us. The only problem is I don't see how a drone works in a dense environment like Brooklyn or even Queens, Staten Island, Manhattan. I don't see that there's any physical land on which the drone can put down. And so I think we're talking mostly about delivery in less dense environments than New York City. And I think that the delivery is going to be done. There's no reason for a drone to fly over 400 feet. So we'll keep the drone down below 400 feet and the pilots out there will stay above 400 feet. So I do think that the drones they're coming. That's nobody's questioning that. But I don't think they're going to be as pervasive as it sounds like. It's at least not, I don't think your Domino's pizza is going to be coming tomorrow that way. Ilya, I'd like to get the private pilot's license and instrument rating no sooner than in around 7 to 10 years. When would be a good time to start working towards that? So I see the gambit for how long it takes for a student to earn a private pilot's license. The FAA, let's talk about that first, and then we can talk about the instrument rating, which is roughly the same amount of time. So the FAA says that you need 40 hours. In reality, it's closer to about 50 hours, and some people take 60 hours, and there was one student that I heard of that took 100 hours. That's expensive. The longer you take, the more time you're going to need, because naturally you forget certain things. It's sort of like if you hadn't ridden a bike in 10 years, sure, you can pick it back up, but it's going to take you a little while before you feel comfortable on that bike. Same thing with flying. If you haven't flown in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, then you've forgotten quite a bit of material, and you're going to have to go back and relearn that material before you're ready to actually commit to flying again. So there's an amount that is lost week by week, and the more weeks you have in between, or months even in between your flying, the more you're going to need to recoup that information and remember that information, and that means spending more time and more money. So the shortest I've ever seen anybody do a complete soup to nuts private pilot license, 0 hours to certified private pilot, is I think it was 18 days. 18 days he got his private pilot's license. Now this is somebody who is dedicated, committed. He went every day. He had his written done prior to it, already had his medical, walked in the first day with no knowledge, walked out 18 days later with a pilot's license. That's possible. It's unusual. If you're going once a week, it's probably going to take you more like 12 months to get a private pilot's license, because there's going to be weeks where you're canceled. There's going to be weeks where you're not able to fly. There's going to be weeks where, the airplane's down and you can't do it, or so on. Even if you're committed, even if you're doing it once a week, it's probably going to take you a year. The instrument rating is about the same. You can do it a little bit faster. I would say about 3 to 4 months. So if you're looking to get your private pilot's license and instrument rating, I would start 24 months before you want to have it. That's the safe bet. If you start too early, then you're just a pilot for longer. Yeah, that's a good thing. It doesn't take that long. It's really quite a surprising thing. You can do it in 18 days. And a lot of people commit and they'll do, 2 or 3 times a week, and then they'll get it done in 2 months, 3 months, something like that. It's very possible. All right. Any other questions? I think we're probably, Deanna, I guess we're probably going to try and do another one of these. Is that about right?
Absolutely. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
We'll get an email.
I knew that Deanna was going to ask me to do another one. I had that feeling. So now I got to figure out a topic for the next one. If any of you
If
have
anybody has any thoughts on things you'd like to know about or anything like that, put it in the chat. Send me an email. We'd love it. We'd love to see you back.
All right, but other than that, I'll stick around for a little while. Thanks for coming by and let me talk about aviation. And the picture behind me, in case anybody's interested, that's I took that of Brooklyn. That's actually Brooklyn. You can see Staten Island. Sorry, excuse me. You can see Sheepshead Bay just over my shoulder, right about here. And then Prospect Park is right out, I think, right over here. And Tandon would be right about there, right about there. So that's Brooklyn. I was flying west to east, just under the class. No, I was over. I was over the class Bravo airspace at around 7,500 feet. Nick, something about data science applications to aviation would be super awesome. Ooh, oh, that's a tough topic. All right, Nick, let me flesh that one out a little bit. Let's see what I can do.
That's awesome. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. We hope to see you again. Thanks, Daniel. This was great.
Yeah, no problem, Deanna. Have a great one.
Bye, y'all.